I'm Matthew, this is Lemora's Cards, and today we're doing something a little bit different. Today I'm going to be talking about a different card game than I usually do, and that is Disney's Lorcana. This is a game that I've been following for a little bit, and I've been really hyped with what I've seen. A lot of the game design really leans into things that I've wanted out of a card game. It's even really similar to game that I've worked on myself, and it's really cool to see like a major team with a big IP going through and making a game like this. It's super simple, got the most iconic characters and all of history, and seems to have like a really passionate and very smart team behind it. Check out the link in the description. Is a playlist to teach you all the basics of the game. It's super simple, no matter your experience level in games like Magic, Hearthstone, any kind of TCG, or even no experience whatsoever. Very basic, and we're gonna have some more beginner focused content coming onto the channel soon. But today I wanted to talk about the big set reveal. So Lorcana's first set has been fully revealed, and there is a deck that I brewed that I am super excited for and also a little scared of because it might get banned. And that is a deck built around Ariel Who's It Collector. This is an incredibly powerful card, trading card game. People kind of saw this card and were like, okay, this might get banned or changed because it just does something that the rest of the game doesn't really allow, and that's a card that can untap itself and quest again. So when paired with cards like Maurice that also work off of all of your items, and especially newly revealed cards like Fishbone Quill, which just helps you accelerate and turn some of your dead cards into mana, and Eye of the Fates was the huge one. This card has absolutely broken this archetype wide open, I feel like. I've been testing a build of Steel Sapphire, playing against super aggro decks, other control decks, other ramp decks, and this deck has popped off against almost every single one of them, either just taking over the game and killing the opponent before they can really do anything, or using its bit of control tools to develop and then go into the late game and OTK your opponent. You can easily win from 0 lore and go way past 20 in a single turn with this deck. The main thing this deck tries to take advantage of is the very cheap items. We don't really want them in our opening hand, so we'll kind of throw them away. They're kind of terrible in the early game. But what we want to do is set up an engine with Ariel, Eye of the Fates, and ideally Maurice. If you can get these 3 cards on the board, there's very good chance you can win in a single turn or get incredibly close and end the turn with all of your stuff very safe and not exhausted. So the main combo is to have an Ariel and an Eye of the Fates in play. Tap Eye of the Fates targeting Ariel. Tap Ariel, quest for 2. If you have 2 Eye of the Fates, you can quest for 3. Makes it a lot easier. Or if you have multiple Ariels, also makes it a lot easier. And then play an item. At this point, that will trigger Ariel, untap her, you get to quest again for 3. So it turns all of your 1 and 2 cost items, of which this deck runs all of them, into gain 1, 2, 3, sometimes even 4 lore. And if you have a Maurice, or especially 2 Maurices, they also draw a card or draw 2 cards, and it becomes, I think, the most powerful engine you can have. Like, it becomes even more ridiculous than Stitch because it's not just cards you're getting, it's the effect of those cards sometimes with items, plus you're gaining lore. So this is closer to like a burn combo control deck. That's really your main engine. Maurice, Ariel, Eye of the Fates, and then often a Fishbone Quill. It's not necessarily part of the engine, but it works incredibly well. 1, because it lets you ink the high number of uninkable cards that this deck has to run, mainly due to it being Sapphire Steel, which has a lot of staples that are uninkable, but Fishbone Quill gets around this. And a key part of Fishbone Quill is that it puts the cards into play just straight up. They're not exerted. You get to use the mana the same turn. So you can have really big plays like on turn 3, playing the Fishbone Quill, tap it, ink something else, do something like develop your brain, for instance, to set up your draws. Going into the next turn, then you're developing Ariel. It gets crazy really quickly. So the reason that we run Steel is kind of twofold. 1, I think Steel at the moment has sort of the rawest, like good stuff, high card quality things that you can work with. Cards like Grab Your Sword are amazing because this deck can fall behind to aggro decks. They do threaten to win quicker if they develop well. So cards like Grab Your Sword, Smash, and potentially Fire the Cannons, which I'm currently not on, but I may move to because it not being inkable isn't really that big of a deal because it's such a flexible card. And also, again, we have Fishbone Quill. So Steel helps you control aggro, but the biggest thing that Steel does is it gives you the best source of card draw other than Maurice in the game, I think. And that's a whole new world. You cannot sleep on this card. There's a reason this sort of effect has been banned or restricted in almost every other card game that's ever had it. You will break this card better than your opponents can. If you can do something like use Maurice to sing a whole new world, drawing 7 cards, having 5 to 8 mana, and then again, you are going to get get way more value out of this because when you play an item after that whole new world, you get to draw a card. You're not going card negative, throwing up on the board for the most part. And then also, again, this entire time Ariel is tapping and untapping, you're getting a lot of lore. You're going to throw up so much stuff on the board and draw so many cards and get so much lore. It's probably not going to matter what your opponent gets. I can't stress enough, this deck generates lore incredibly fast. You're also running cards like Ransack that aren't that great in the early game, but are inkable fortunately, but that allow you to dig for items or for your combo pieces when you're really wanting to put something together, or even again, a whole new world. You can find that it doesn't matter that a card like Ransack is card negative when you can just dump your hand, whole new world, go. And again, whole new world works incredibly well with a card like Inkbone Quill because it rewards you for ramping. If you get to play your one jump aheads, your Inkbone Quills, you're inking 2-3 cards a turn, you run out of cards incredibly quickly, and being able to just refill with a whole new world, again, especially if you sing it, but even just doing it raw and having way more mana than your opponent likely does, you are super favored in that spot. This deck doesn't play like a typical Lorcana deck. I've seen people build similar Steel Sapphire item decks. You don't want to think about this as a synergy deck. We don't really get a lot of good value out of these items because a lot of them don't do super powerful things compared to what the top end of focusing on Ariel, Maurice, and Eye of the Fates does. And that is burn your opponent down very quickly. There are some other cards you could run in this list. I'm not 100% on my list as it is. I read a couple of Bell Inventive Engineers. Haven't felt super strong in the list, but if you can get it down on 3, it's really good. One of the more awkward things in the list can be the 3 drops are a bit at odds with Inkbone Quill because very often you want to get Inkbone Quill down in favor of them. And then once you do, you're looking at having 5 mana on turn 4. And then again, your 3 drops don't line up very well. You'd much rather do something like go ahead and play an Ariel or play out a Eye of the Fates. We also run a couple copies of Simba for some of that card filtering. We're really looking for certain cards. You could refer to this as like a turbo deck, but I think it also has room for some good stuff, generic mid-range sort of builds, right? I think splashing in a couple of copies of Tinkerbell Tiny Tactician as well as Tinkerbell Giant Fairy is pretty low investment. Tiny Tactician helps you filter into the cards that you want, and Tinkerbell Giant Fairy is just very good at helping you get control back of the board when an aggro deck with a couple Maleficents and a Lilo takes over. And that can be the weak part of this deck because this deck doesn't do an incredibly good job of fighting over the board. And I think often you're not going to want a mulligan for those sort of things that fight for the board unless you know the matchup. So if you know the matchup, keeping a Grab Your Sword or a couple smashes, or again, if you want to go on Fire the Cannons, can be really impactful. Typically, the cards I'm most looking for are sometimes a 1 jump ahead. You don't want them in duplicates. They don't stack very well together. Inkbone Quill is one of your best cards. Ariel, you actually kind of might want to consider a Maurice, especially if you expect it's a slower matchup, and because he is the most powerful card here because he makes it very easy to kill with Ariel. And believe it or not, I've often found that a whole new world in my opening hand, at least in 1 copy, is really good. It's not inkable. It's a 5 drop. It doesn't seem like it should be, but the ability to throw up your hand onto the board and then just get a new one while you're ramping, while you're developing your engine, every game it's been played, it's just a slam dunk. If you need to, cards like a Whole New World and Grab Your Sword, which can sit in your hand and kind of rot, you can ink them with Inkbone Quill. Now, the things you want to avoid in your opening hand are honestly almost every single item other than Fishbone Quill and Eye of the Fates. These items are for the late game when you're going to do this kind of Storm or Miracle turns, if you're familiar with Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering terminology, that you're looking to do to win. But these cards don't really help us that well in the early game. Things that they can provide though are if you need to fight over the board, Ariel is actually very good at fighting over the board with Magic Golden Flower. Being able to do things like attack your Ariel into a 1 or 2 drop that's questing for, more lore than you're comfortable with, playing the Magic Golden Flower, untapping her, attacking with her again, and then healing her can be very good. Having that flexibility with Ariel to be able to sing, quest, or attack and then be untapped with an item can be really good. It's not necessarily what the deck is trying to do, so I wouldn't think of this as an item synergy deck. This is really an item combo deck that just runs these items because they trigger our most impactful cards. In my testing, at least, this has been the most powerful deck. It, I believe, may struggle against some disruptive green decks, and it definitely can be overran from aggro if your opening hand isn't good for the matchup, or they just kind of have the nuts. Turn 4 Stitch can be hard to beat for any deck. In a lot of cases, though, the more fair sort of mid-range decks that look to develop into the late game, you're going to set up pretty securely, not give them a lot of opportunities to attack into your characters because you don't really tap a lot until you're going to combo off, and then you just kind of win out from nowhere. Again, you can start the turn on 0 and just win, even with just an Ariel. It makes me a little worried because this is one of the most fun decks I've played in any card game, and I don't want Ariel to get banned, but I had to let you guys know about this deck because I think it's so cool. I want a full play set of foil Ariels. This is one of my favorite cards I've ever played with, and Maurice is cool too. This deck, I think, with subsequent sets will look very scary because when this deck gets items that it actually cares about that work very well, items that draw cards, items that interact with the board, then you're going to be looking at a very different list that I think is incredibly consistent and is very, very, very scary. So I'm really excited to see what items we get in the future. Let me know if you're interested in Lorcana, if you're excited for it, if you like this deck, what decks that have performed well for you. I'm not going to pretend that I've made the best deck possible on day one, but I am in love with this deck and it's performed incredibly well for me. So I'd like to know what you think about it and what you think about other decks that you're excited for. The game is coming out very soon, and I'm really looking forward to cracking open some packs and hopefully pulling some cards from this list. I'd love to get a foiled out version of it. With all that being said, thank you so much for watching. Thank you to all my patrons over on Patreon. Have a good one.